is day 53 of 100 Days with Jesus. Yesterday we covered Mark chapter 14. Well, tonight we're covering its counterpart in Matthew chapter 26, that is. And honestly, it really tracks along the same progression, same stories, maybe a little bit of different details from one story to another, or said in different wordings, but at the same time saying the same thing. They're What's really crazy is that you have two different gospels written by two different people, and even though their wordings are different in different ways, they're saying the exact same thing. Um, it's pretty amazing stuff for them to be so spot on like that together with each other. But here we are, Matthew 26 starts out with Jesus saying to his disciples that uh, says, "You know that the Passover is coming up. It takes place in 2 days, and that the Son of Man will be handed over to be crucified." And there was three different occasions prior to this as well, before they ever got to Jerusalem, that Jesus took his disciples aside and and made it very clear to them that what's about to be happening in Jerusalem, or very clearly shared with them. So, and then it also notes here that the chief priest on that same day, and the elders of the people assembled in the palace of the high priest, who is called Caiaphas, and they conspired to arrest Jesus. Their plans were being made to do so, to arrest Jesus in a treacherous way and kill him, but not during the festival, they said, because they did not want to cause rioting among the people. Now, to give some background on that story, both Mark and Matthew tell this other story of Jesus' anointing at Bethany uh, by Mary, who is the sister of Martha, and Lazarus, who was risen from the dead. But it appears to be the daughter of Simon. Simon is mentioned by name in three of the Gospels, in Mark and the one that we covered yesterday, but also he's mentioned in a different way, and I believe it's the same Simon, because we have the same story told in different ways, but they both agree and line up with each other. They match each other. Although Luke's version of this is earlier in the gospel. So you have here, um, Simon being named as someone who used to be a leper, who had leprosy, uh, but apparently he was healed because he couldn't be out in Jewish culture. You could not be mixing and mingling with anybody if you had leprosy. But apparently he had been healed. Maybe he was the guy that Jesus healed early on in his ministry. It's told about toward the beginning of the Gospels, various Gospels, that is, various Gospel accounts. So, but in Luke's version, it doesn't mention that he had leprosy, but it does mention that he was a Pharisee. It's an interesting thing, just to know. So here he is, and there's some other details we can get into that Luke mentions there too. But here we are, where Jesus is there at the home of Simon, of Lazarus, of Mary, of Martha, and Mary takes this like jar of perfume, like an alabaster jar, and she breaks it open, and she's pouring this fragrant oil on Jesus. She poured it on his head as he was reclining at the table. And another account said that she also would take the perfume, the fragrant oil, and also wash his feet with them as well. So the problem arises that there's certain disciples, and John's gospel tells us Judas by name. um, really isn't mentioning other disciples, but here we have a cluster of disciples in both Mark and Matthew. When they saw it, they were indignant, and when doesn't mean that all the disciples were, but there are at least certain disciples that were indignant about this. They were upset about this, and they said, This might have been sold for a great deal and given to the poor. And we're told in other gospels that great deal would have been as much as 300 denarii, as much as, um, which would have been 10 months' wages, as much as a year's wages, or close to a year's wages for that matter. But Jesus, aware of this, he said to them, "Why are you bothering this woman? She's doing a beautiful thing for me. She's doing a beautiful thing that's going to be told in many, many years to come, and also the all the world over, to the ends of the earth. As this gospel message is told, she's going to be talked about. Um, it says, "You will not always have me with you, but you will always have the poor. And while you have me with you, let's make a big deal about it, and let's do make it as special as it can be." Um, and Jesus says that she's prepared him for his burial. And word for word, wherever this gospel is proclaimed in the whole world, this woman, what she's done, will be told in memory of her as a legacy. And so one of the 12, the man called Judas Iscariot, after this happened, and we were told why in John, because Judas is the one that was ringleading this like fussing and griping about her doing this. Judas, he gets mad. He goes off and says, "You know what? I don't really have faith in Jesus anyway. I'm just along for the ride and trying to get what I can out of the purse when I can." Because that's John tells us that the reason why he complained about it is because he was taking money for himself out of the disciples' treasury. So Judas, he rushes off and he goes and meets with the disciples. Now, not disciples, the Pharisees, the Jewish leaders. Now, something to note about that, all this in John's gospel, we're told that this all happened on the Saturday before Jesus rode. So even before Jesus rode into the city on that Sunday, Judas is going and making an agreement, making a pact with the Pharisees, the Jewish leaders, and he's paid 30 pieces of silver to do so. He says to them, "What are you willing to give me?" And they weighed out 30 pieces of silver, which fulfills scripture because it was to the number of 30 pieces of silver named, you know, how the amount that Jesus would be betrayed by. And that was it. And from that time, he started looking for a good opportunity to betray him. And we catch more of that later in the chapter. So they're having the meal. Um, the first day of the unleavened bread, Matthew goes ahead and tells us a little bit more of a condensed version, it seems. How he just goes straight into telling us about the meal, not about going and getting in the room. He doesn't include that part. We already have that in Mark's gospel. Why do we need it in Matthew's too? So, but he does recap the fact that they, on the first day of the festival, um, let me correct that. So yeah, it looks like they did go into the city. So it does tell about how they go into the city. Sorry about that. Noticed that. So off on that. So correction. Uh, it does have how they go into the city uh, and find a certain man, and that certain man leads them to the room where Jesus would have the Passover with them. When the evening came, he was reclining at the table with the 12, and while they were eating, he said, "I assure you, one of you will betray me." We have accounts of this going on, and Jesus telling them about this in at least three of the Gospels, probably Luke as well. Um, and deeply distressed, they began saying, "Well, surely not I, Lord," because they're a lot like, you know, going back and forth with each other about who it really is, saying, "Surely not me." So he replied, "The one who dips his bread with me in the bowl, and he's the one that's going to betray me." And then Judas, the betrayer, replied, "Surely not I, Rabbi," knowing full well that it was him. He says, "You've said it." He told him, "You are the one." So As they were eating, Jesus took the bread and he blessed it and he broke it and he gave it to them, to the disciples, and he said, "Take and eat, this is my body." And then the cup, after giving thanks, he gave it to them as well and said, "Drink from it, all of you, for this is my blood that establishes the covenant. It is shed for many um, for the forgiveness of sins. But I tell you, from this moment on, I will not drink of wine again until I drink it in a new way in my Father's kingdom with you." After singing psalms, they went up to the Mount of Olives. And then Jesus told them, "Tonight you will run away because of me. For it is written, I will strike the shepherd." And Mark tells us just like this too. So I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. That's a quote that Jesus made of Zechariah 13, verse 7. So you go back in the Old Testament, Zechariah is only, it's like two books, like from the, it's like not the last book of the Old Testament, the next to last in most copies of the Old Testament, most copies of the Bible. But it's the next to last book in the Old Testament, Zechariah chapter 13, verse 4. That is um, actually 7. Having trouble reading my writing. But yeah, chapter 13, verse 7. "But after I've been resurrected, I will go ahead of you to Galilee." But when Jesus told them this, that you're going to run away from me, you're going to abandon me, when I'm struck, you're going to scatter, just like the sheep talked about in that passage. Peter pipes up and says, "Even if everyone runs away because of you, I will never run away from you, Lord." And Jesus says, "I assure you, tonight, before the rooster crows," he doesn't mention the detail of the second crow, he just mentions crows, and that's true. Yes, the rooster did crow before that, but the rooster crowed again, and it's when that rooster crowed again that he had just denied Jesus a third time. It says, "You will deny me 3 times before the rooster crows." Um, "And even if I have to die with you," Peter told him, "I will never deny you." And all the disciples said the same thing. Little did they all know that they would all abandon him, just like Jesus said, and that Peter himself would deny him 3 times, just like he said. And then there was a rooster that crowed just after that. It's the second time the rooster crowed. And then Jesus came with them to a place called Gethsemane, and he told his disciples, "Sit here while I go over there and pray." And taking along with him Peter and the sons of Zebedee, Matthew tells us, but we know by name that's John and James, the son of Zebedee. They were all fishermen, happen to be. It doesn't mention Andrew, it does mention those three, though. And he says, "He began to be sorrowful and deeply distressed. He said to them, 'My soul is swallowed up in sorrow to the point of death. Remain here and stay awake with me.' Going a little farther, he fell face down and he prayed, 'My Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me, yet not as I will, but as you will.' Then he came to the disciples and he found them sleeping. He asked Peter, 'So couldn't you wait with me? Couldn't you stay awake with me at least 1 hour?' He says, 'Stay awake and pray so that you won't enter into temptation.' And boy, he's about to be tempted and he was about to enter into it. But Jesus is like, 'Look, if you don't want to go and deny me, like I said, or you do what you can, pray. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak.' And the second time he went, but Jesus all along knew that Peter was not going to pray, as it would be needed for him to pray in order for him to resist that temptation to deny Jesus. But again, a second time he went away and he prayed. He prayed basically the same prayer: "Father, if this cannot pass unless I drink it, your will be done." The other gospel Mark, that is, it says, "Not my will, but yours be done." And he came again and he found them sleeping because they could not keep their eyes open. And after leaving them, he went away again and prayed a third time. and saying the same thing once more, praying the same thing once more. Then he came to the disciples again, but this time it was the last time he would come to them, and said to them, "Are you still sleeping and resting? Look, the time is near. The Son of Man is being betrayed into the hand of sinners." Just like Jesus has been telling them and telling them and telling them that he would be betrayed into the hands of sinners, handed over to sinners. Get up, he says, let's go. See, my betrayer is near. Jesus, in all his praying, part of his praying, he knew intuitively through prayer that Jesus was around the corner, and those who were coming with him were coming as well. While he was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, suddenly arrived, and a large mob, a large group of people, like a large army of people, with swords and clubs, and with them the chief priest and the elders of the people. Don't they have something better to do? I mean, goodness. Here they all come. And his betrayer had given him a sign, the one-eyed kiss. And by the way, even today, and you may belong to a culture that still does this, even today's different cultures, the way they literally greet their friends or their family members, those that they are close friends or family members with, uh, is rather than a handshake like we do in American culture commonly, they would do a kiss to one side and then to another, you know, each kissing each other on the cheek as they come to each side. I imagine this was a common thing then, and this was something that Jesus would commonly do because he would act like he was Jesus's friend. It's nothing more than a friend thing. But Judas came and acting like he was Jesus's buddy, acting like he was Jesus's friend, came and did the customary greeting as if they were friends, using that as a sign to mark who Jesus was so that they would know who to arrest. He said, "Greetings, Rabbi," and then did that greeting. And Jesus says to him, "Friend, why have you come?" As if he didn't know, but he did, and he knew full well. Then they came up and they took hold of Jesus and they arrested him. And John tells us some interesting details about this, and that's what we'll actually cover um, 2 days from now. We'll cover John's account of this, John 18, and I love the account there. It's just awesome. Um, but then they came and they arrested him, and at that moment, one of those with Jesus reached out his hand and drew his sword, and he struck the high priest's slave and cut off his ear. And then Jesus said to him, and we're told in one of the Gospels that it was actually Peter who did that. Um, then Jesus told him, "Put your sword away, put it back in its place, because all who take up the sword will die, will perish by the sword. Or do you think that I cannot call my Father? If I needed somebody to do something, I can call my Father and have angels come. He will provide for me at once more than 12 legions of angels." And that legions being like 6,000 soldiers, 6,000 soldiers worth of angels, like times 10,000. It's a lot of angels. But if you needed that, it was just a call away. It's like, "Peter, I don't need you to do this. Put your sword away. That's not what it came to do." How then would the scriptures be fulfilled that say it must happen this way? That he must be arrested, that he must be handed over to sinners, that he must endure the sufferings and all of that he went through. And at that time, Jesus said to the crowds, "Have you come out with swords and clubs as if I were a criminal to capture me? Every day I used to sit teaching in the temple complex. If you needed to arrest me, you could arrest him then. But there was a reason why they didn't. But all this has happened so that the prophetic scriptures would be fulfilled." Then all the disciples deserted him and they ran away. All of them, but essentially John, but also Peter, who followed at a distance. They all ran away. They were gone. They dispersed. They ran like if you've ever been to a room or a place where there was happened to be roaches, you turn the light on, the roaches like fleeing. It's almost like that. But those who had arrested Jesus, I mean, they were afraid. I mean, they were scared. They were scared they would be arrested too. Guilty by association, right? But those who had arrested Jesus led him away to Caiaphas the high priest. Um, Another gospel tells us that before that, they even led him to Annas, which was his father in law, um, where the scribes and the elders had convened. Meanwhile, Peter followed him, as I was mentioning earlier, at a distance, right to the high priest's courtyard. And it says that John did too. And John's the one that actually got him into the courtyard. And John's gospel tells us about that. And he went in and he was sitting with the temple police, the temple guards, to see the outcome. The very ones that came and arrested Jesus. The chief priest and the whole Jewish council, they were looking for false testimony, and they got people to give false testimonies. But the problem is that were none of them sounded like they amounted to anything. But finally, certain ones said, "Oh, well, he said that this. He said that I can demolish God's sanctuary and rebuild it in 3 days." But even those that were saying that, were they were their stories weren't matching exactly. But then it's like the high priest said, "Enough of it all." Then he stood up and he said to him, "Don't you have an answer for what these men are testifying against you?" Such as that very statement. But Jesus kept silent, and there's prophecies being fulfilled right there when he does that. And then the high priest said to him, "By the living God, I place you under oath. Tell us if you are the Messiah, the Son of God." And Jesus said the same thing he had said at least a couple other times in the gospel accounts. And of course, it's recorded in the Mark's gospel. He says this too. Um, but I'm talking about prior occasions. He had said the same type of thing. He says, "You have said it. What you said is true." You just told him, "But I tell you, in the future, you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of the power and coming on the clouds of heaven." He says that to Nathaniel at the beginning of John's gospel. He says it at least in one other place too, in the gospels, one other point in time. But then the high priest tore his robes and said, "He's blasphemed." Because when Jesus says this, he's counting himself equal with God. He's describing himself in godlike terminology, description. And it would be blasphemy if it wasn't true, but the thing is, the reality is, it absolutely was indeed definitely true. Um, so it wasn't blasphemy, even though they claimed it was. Would have been if he was lying, but he wasn't. "Why do we still need witnesses?" Caiaphas said. "Look now, you've heard this blasphemy." He's saying this to all those who were there. "What is your decision?" And they answered, "He deserves death. Blasphemy is punishable by death." Then they spit in his face. Mark's gospel tells us this too. And they beat him, and others slapped him and said, "Prophesy to us, Messiah. Who hit you?" And from what I understand, Mark's gospel did not mention that particular detail, but thankfully Matthew gives us that detail too. It just ramps up the tragedy of how, I say tragedy, or how terrible they were being, and they were treating him. And now while all this is going on, all this has happened, Peter was sitting outside in the courtyard where Matthew's gospel left him being before it went into these other details about Jesus' trial. And he's sitting out there, and there's a servant that approaches him and says, "You were with Jesus, the Galilean too." but he denied it in front of everybody publicly so they all would hear. I don't know what you're talking about. It's like, man, get off my case. If we were to put it into modern American vernacular, that is. And when he had gone out to the gateway, another woman saw him and told those who were there, "This man was with Jesus the Nazarene." And again, he denied it with an oath this time. "I don't know the man. Can you not get that? Leave me alone." He's trying to get out of getting caught up as being guilty by association, just like all the other disciples that had fled. And a little while, and after a little while, those standing there, they approached and said to Peter, "You certainly are one of them, since even your accent gives you away." And Mark's gospel says, "Because you're a Galilean." Well, Matthew's gospel tells us why they said that. Says the way you talk, it sounds like a Galilean. I live here in the South, and I may not talk very much like I'm here from the South, but there's a lot of people here in the South that talk a lot like they're from the South, and you pretty much it's just like for those of us in the South, you hear somebody come up from the North in the United States, the Northeast United States, New England, or wherever, and they have what maybe some of us would call a Yankee accent, or a New York accent, or a Boston accent. Well, Peter had a Galilean accent. He was not the kind of Aramaic that they would speak in the Jerusalem, Judean area. It says your accent gives you away. You're guilty by your accent because Jesus and all his disciples, they were Galileans. That's the way they had it. And then he started to curse. He denied it, and then he denied it with an oath. And this time he started to cuss, we would say, and to swear with an oath. And swear with an oath again, "I do not know the man." And immediately, at that very moment, the rooster crows. And we're told in Mark's gospel the second time, but again, a rooster crows at the very moment that Peter denies Jesus. And then at that moment also, when he hears the rooster crows, he remembers Jesus' words. He has a flashback of Jesus' words. Goes right back to that moment when Jesus said exactly what was going to happen before it happened. "Before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times." And he went outside and he wept bitterly. And it goes and spells it out more specifically, not just that he wept, but wept bitterly, as it says here in Matthew's account. Things are intensifying here in the story. They've been intensifying all along this week as we've journeyed with Jesus. We spent these days with Jesus leading up to his crucifixion, and that time is coming very, very soon. He's just gone through a number of the trials, sentenced to death by the Jews, that is, but they can't put anybody to death, and we're going to see how that unfolds in the next day or two. It's my pleasure to spend this time with you. I hope that you're blessed by it. Look, if you know Jesus, know him more. Read these gospels for yourself. Dive deep into the gospels, the stories of Jesus that are in these gospels, the teachings of Jesus, the things that Jesus did for us, particularly at the end of the gospels, but all throughout it. Um, but if you don't know Jesus, you just don't know what you're missing out on. The very moment you really, truly come to know who Jesus is, you really, truly come to know Jesus as Lord and Savior and friend, you would have wished, man, if I could have just done this sooner. This is what I've been missing all of my life. You didn't need a six-figure income. You didn't need uh, the fanciest car or the nicest home. The one thing that you have needed, that we all would have needed all of our lives until we have it, is Jesus. And when you have that very need, being met in Jesus in and of himself, the need that you have for Jesus himself being met. It's the best thing, like the best thing. It's just like every time I ever stray away or like lose fellowship with Jesus and I get back in right fellowship, it's the best thing. I remember one time I went and got a new pair of glasses and I put those things on and the old ones just weren't working as well before I'd gotten those. When I got them, and it's like, oh, the blue and the green and I see, and it's so beautiful with these new glasses on. It doesn't even hold a candle to how beautiful things become in life. Jesus himself becomes so beautiful, and the things that Jesus taught, the things that Jesus did, and the things that he's wanting to do in your life and wanting to do in other people's lives, the things he's already doing, you're seeing him do. Now you can see clearly he's doing them. All along, these things that you've been seeing, you knew it was good and you knew it was great, but you didn't know it was Jesus that was behind it. But now you do it. And I guarantee you, more than likely, there's somebody that's probably been praying for you to be saved and praying for you to trust Jesus as Savior. And may today be the day that you do. And allow those prayers that people have prayed for you to actually be answered. And you to give your heart and life to Jesus, to surrender your life to Him. It's the best thing any of us will ever have done in our whole entire lifetime, in all of eternity. Be blessed.